I am going to start recording and start today's session so that we can stay on time as much as possible. Welcome, my name is Kimmy Garner. I am the Assistant Director of Duke Service Learning. It's wonderful to see all of your faces here today. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us and learn more about Durham's past and present from speakers both at North Carolina Central University and here at Duke. We have a really packed 2 hours of presentations as well as a breakout room that we will do towards the end of the session. Just a couple of housekeeping items. I have muted participants, and we do kindly ask that you stay on mute for the duration of the session, obviously until you're in your breakout rooms. And if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I also wanted to mention we will have a follow-up event to continue the conversation next Thursday, September 17th. From 10 to 11:30 a.m. I will send out that Zoom link later today to all of you, but we recognize this is a short amount of time to really dive into some fascinating information about Durham and Duke, so we would like to make sure that we are extending that time to talk together. So please join us if you can next Thursday to continue the conversation. I'm now going to turn it over to David Malone, my supervisor, and he is the faculty director of Duke Service Learning, as well as a professor of the practice in the program in education at Duke. And he will kick us off today with introductions and a welcome.
Hey, thank you, Kimmy. And Kimmy, thank you so much for all you've done to pull this together. It's been an incredible amount of work, and we really appreciate all your efforts. I'm David Malone. I'm the director of Duke Service Learning. We're a program within Duke Arts and Sciences, and we support faculty and staff in connecting and students in connecting to communities, particularly faculty who teach academic courses who wish to have a community engaged component. And thank everyone so much for staying with us today. It's going to be we're gonna have some time at the end to talk, and as Kimmy said, next week we're going to set aside more time. This isn't our normal way of proceeding. We're really a kind of community-based organization in terms of building community, but today we have a lot to get through. I'd like for the Service Learning team members just to introduce themselves, say your name so people know who you are. Start with Amy.
Hi, yes, my name is Amy Anderson. I'm a faculty consultant with Duke Service Learning and teach in our program in education.
Hi, I'm Joan Clifford. I'm Director of Community-Based Language Initiatives and a faculty consultant as well.
Hey, I'm Ruth Eccles. I'm the Communications and Events Specialist with Duke Service Learning.
I'm Kathy Sykes. I'm Senior Fellow for Civic Engagement with Duke Service Learning.
You're muted, Betsy. Betsy, you're muted. Betsy is the sole mother of Duke Service Learning. She was the first director and creator of Duke Service Learning. Betsy.
Yes, now I'm working with the program in ed to do a few faculty interviews, so I may be calling you.
All right, well, thank you. Here's how we'd like to start. Normally we would do a introductory activity, but what we're going to do right now is I'm going to ask you to put into the chat your affiliation, your role or organization, just something about yourself, and then a 2-word snapshot that represents the range of feelings or thoughts that you have about or associate with Durham. Just put in the chat, and then everyone will be able to read those as we go along. Your role, your affiliation, 2-word snapshot that captures your range of feelings and thoughts that you associate with Durham. Singular and home. Thank you, Barbara. That's 2 words, love it. Now, Kimmy, as people do that, and just to keep the time going, if you would show the next slide. So this is the mission of Duke Service Learning. As I mentioned, we connect academic curriculum to communities to foster enriched learning and engagement and ethical collaborations. We spend a lot of time talking with students and faculty and staff about what an ethical collaboration is. Not that we have the answers, but we believe that it's a series of questions we always need to be asking. And we've included here a quote by Lilla Watson, who is an activist in Australia, that talks about and is connected to our philosophy of the ways in which that we try to build reciprocity, solidarity, and mutuality with our community partners. So Kimmy, let's turn it over to Barbara Mamie and start learning about Durham.
Thank you all so much. It's so great to be here and I just want to reinforce what was said earlier, that this is a very short time to learn more about Durham history and culture. And so we'll do our best just to give you maybe a few things that are really meaningful to us. Mamie and I have worked together for more than 20 years doing community-based documentary work, community organizing and empowerment, and we work together on the Pauli Murray Center for History and Social Justice. Mamie, do you want to also give us an opening word?
First, I need to unmute myself. Good morning, everyone. I am very happy to be here. And I will be looking at and sharing stories that are more personal in nature, that will give you a sense of what it was like to grow up here. So,
thanks. So, Kimmy, if you could give us the next slide. I know that when I moved here more than 20 years ago, some of the things that I learned early on have really stuck with me and helped me think about why is Durham like it is today. And I go back to these early days when, well, Durham was always like this. It didn't matter who was living here, but how much the land itself and the ecology have shaped how North Carolina operates, how people live and have lived in North Carolina. So I offer you this slide as an opening just to understand that there are really three distinct regions in North Carolina that are really defined by their topography. The eastern region, which is with its sandy soil, was great for growing tobacco and had a whole internal system of rivers, which allowed for transportation before there was a road system. The Piedmont, which is where we live, it's, you know, mountainous, but not mountainous, rolling hills, that wasn't always so great for agriculture, but then lent itself as transportation corridor and for manufacturing. And the mountains, which were very different and continue to be distinct both in their ecology and in the sort of culture of the mountains. And different people began to live here once Europeans made their way and dislocated the native people. I think we do have to acknowledge and affirm that we are standing on the land of the Occaneechi, and that you know, there were a lot of people who lived here before white folk and African American folk arrived. So next slide, please. So in that same vein, along with these regions came after European settlement, this idea about who was going to live where. And while the Scots-Irish settled the mountain regions, the British and many Western Europeans came to the coastal plain, and they also brought enslaved Africans there. And so when we think about where people lived, it's no surprise in some sense that the agricultural East, where there were large plantations, where there was a lot of tobacco grown, was also the home to many enslaved Africans. And so this says everything to me right now about current politics in the state. How people vote, why they vote, what the power dynamics continue to look like in Eastern North Carolina, where you have many counties that the demographics are not even dissimilar to this. They're majority African-American counties, and yet they aren't necessarily governed and led by African-Americans. So it is an interesting way to think about the state in terms of these regions and this ecology. But you know, one of the most important things, if you walk away with nothing else, I know a lot of you, that Durham didn't really exist before the Civil War. So next slide, please. This is a map of early Durham. At the end of the Civil War, there were about 250 people living here. As you can see, there were still farms in the middle of what is now downtown. We really came into being because Dr. Bartlett Durham gave some land for a railroad depot, a refueling station. That railroad line now parallels what we think of as I-85, and our role as that point between Washington, D.C. and Atlanta was important when they built the railroads, was important when they built I-85, and continues to be a corridor that connects politics, culture, business, all that stuff. And so in some sense, we're just sort of a happy accident that why we are where we are. But I think the really significant part is that Durham, because it didn't exist before the Civil War, didn't have a set of pre-existing power relationships that were as defined as maybe other cities in North Carolina, like Raleigh, like even Charlotte, and like some of the other cities in the East. Next slide, please. And one of the things that does distinguish Durham is that the largest troop surrender at the end of the Civil War actually happened right outside Durham at the home of the Bennetts. They were Quakers. They had already lost several sons to the war, and so they were open to hosting these generals who were having this conversation. Many of their neighbors actually weren't open to that. They had to go to several places before they could find a place that would welcome both the general from the North and the South. And so all of these conversations took several days. These generals didn't have all of their armies directly with them. They were spread out within 50 to 100 miles of here or so. But there were a large number of soldiers, tired, hungry soldiers waiting for the end of the war. And the story goes that while they were waiting for these generals to make this deal at what is now a state historic site at Bennett Place, they raided a local tobacco barn. And there was both a kind of tobacco and a process for curing tobacco here that made that tobacco sweet and beautiful. It was a golden leaf. You see that all over this area, that reference to the golden leaf. And it was very popular. Tobacco was very popular. And so as those soldiers left at the end of the war and went back to all the places that they called home, they started writing back to Durham and asking for more of that tobacco. Need some more of that sweet leaf. So that demand produced a very large boom in the economy. Durham grew very quickly in order to meet that. Much of the history of the Duke family is tied to this history of tobacco. Next slide, please. While there weren't very many people living in Durham, there was a very large plantation about 10 miles outside of town. It is now also a state historic site, Stagville. The Cameron Benahan family owned more than 30,000 acres and quite a number of human beings. They were Episcopalians. They built a large homestead and had a great deal of land in this area. They also had land in the Deep South. They actually force marched some people from this area to the Deep South toward the end of the Civil War. But at Stagville, there was a very important area of their land, Horton Grove, which is where the enslaved folks lived. It was quite a diverse and talented, skilled population at Stagville, people who were carpenters and blacksmiths and many of the skills that were required. And there were at that time, they owned 900 individuals. This is the picture of a 2-story slave dwelling that exists from that period. This is not like what many people think about as slave dwellings. And so this site is a really, really important site to learn more about that experience in North Carolina. Next slide. So after the end of the Civil War, the folks that had lived at Stagville, some people were eager, of course, to reunite with members of their family, and some people moved far away. Some people continued to farm at Stagville into the 1970s, and some people moved into these growing new communities in Durham. One of them was the West End. We'll hear a little bit more about the largest African-American community, Hayti, in a few minutes, but the West End is over on nearer to Duke's campus and is one of the neighborhoods that we work with, Mamie and I have worked with over time. It is a part of the Duke-Durham Neighborhood Partnership. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense, to zoom in even farther, just a sense of what we think about when we think about the West End and Lyon Park neighborhoods. This was the site of Durham's first cemetery, Maplewood Cemetery, which is founded in the 1870s, but also the home to many African-American folk. And I'm going to turn it over to Mamie to share more about the West End.
Thanks, Barbara. My name is Mamie Webb Bledsoe, and I was born in 1957 in Durham, North Carolina. And I grew up in the West End, also known as Lyon Park, a proud community of African Americans who some were like my mom that might have worked at the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, others working in the tobacco industry or in the cotton mills. A few, like my father, owned their own businesses. They were brick masons or people that worked in the construction industry. I attended local public schools first.
Next slide, please,
inside
Kimmy.
my neighborhood, and a graduate of what is now called the Lyon Park Elementary School. My junior high school was Rogers Her, and during that time period, it was brand new. There was only 13 African Americans that attended the whole school. I graduated from Durham High School, and now that's known as the Durham School of the Arts, and Durham High School no longer exists anymore. My mentors were my neighbors, folks that pushed and lobbied for the community, for paved streets, for funding to build schools and churches, to build field houses and parks in this segregated community called Lyon Park. I had heroes like any other children. Mine were pillars in our community, authorities like our teachers and our principals of our schools. Many of my friends and families founded groups like social clubs, garden clubs, golf teams. We played a lot of baseball during those days and social events. I was nurtured a lot by the elders in the community.
Next slide, please.
One of our major projects, which these pictures are taken in front of, is renovating our old elementary school called Lyon Park. During this time period, Lyon Park was the hub of activities. There was so much going on. Teachers would go into our community and meet parents, and anytime you got in trouble, generally, we were in trouble before we got home, because most of the parents in the communities and the members of the school knew each other. and had taught your other relatives before. But once our school had lost its attractiveness and it was closed, like many of the Negro schools, it lost its luster and it lost its hub of activity, and it was closed. And for many years, it sat vacant, broken windows, lots of burned out floors, and it was neglected during the late 1970s and 60s. So we wanted to pull together a community that would help us make this old abandoned elementary school come back to its former glory. And we'll talk a little bit about how our community pulled together this ingenious solution by working on funding a bond referendum for Parks and Recs to fund the approval of a $6.4 million bond referendum, which allowed us to create from the ashes a new 46,000 square foot community center. Beside the elementary school, there was also lots of playground activity. There was a hub of activities that was popular because a great many of our youth in our community played for the Lyon Park baseball team.
Next slide, please.
Lyon Park residents, Mr. Womble, a former Negro League baseball player, lived right beside the park. His family still lives there today. He and other men from the neighborhood kept youth off the street by encouraging them to play in these leagues. He and other men started the elite baseball team. The Lyon Park neighborhood team was home base for this baseball team, having the distinction of being one of the only two ballparks in the city's limits that had lights for night games. The other park was Hillside, that was located near Haytime. So many of our people played on these teams, and these teams were always managed and coached by community leaders who continue to this tradition today. Resources have supported many of these neighborhood teams through the selling of concessions at the games and personal donations from churches, local churches, and neighborhood fundraisers. This was the case throughout Durham for both white and Black communities, which until the 2004 year were mostly segregated, and when it came to looking at where people lived. Sometimes white and Black residents found themselves on the same side of an argument. And that's how the passing of this referendum for the Community Family Life and Recreation Center at Lyon Park occurred. Its passing was the first time a predominantly Black area in Durham received such a large infusion of cash to address the decades of blight and neighborhood decay. It also was an affirmation for how community leaders whoever doubted their inherent ability to affect change now knows that this Lyon Park school is an example of how even those things that seem insurmountable can still get done. In closing, I wanted to share a story about some of the other experiences that I had in going to the Lyon Park Elementary School. And I want to tell you a story about one of my regrets when I attended Lyon Park. About 50 years ago or so, when I was in the 6th grade at the Lyon Park Elementary School, I remember being a safety patrol. If you go back to the slide before that, you will see an example, a picture of the safety patrol. And I would say a student leader was selected by teachers to help other students cross the streets as they made their way to the elementary school. Back then, most of us walked to our neighborhood school, and the patrols were stationed at specific corners. It was also before the adult crossing guards as you see today. We were student leaders. We were proud of our recognition and we had swagger. Of course, on the downside, it meant that we had to get up every morning very early to be on the corner. But you got to wear something special. This uniform you see with the slash that crisscross your chest and waist, and a shiny badge with a AAA on it. It was not until it became an adult that I even knew what the AAA sign or the badge meant. The AAA Motor Club. And patrols generally were teachers' pets, selected to run errands and such during the school day and be a role model for other students. Lyon Park Safety Patrol had an excellent reputation because it was run by 6th grade teacher, Miss Ruby Grissom. She's pictured in the 1947 Lyon Park Elementary School faculty picture. Each Black elementary school had a safety patrol, and that was something to be proud of. One of our annual events was the citywide safety patrol step show. Each elementary school stepped in unison and performed before an audience of students in the Durham Armory. This was where you got to show your stuff. Our girls were dressed in their wool, tiny 2-inch pleated skirts with tiny 2-inch pleated skirts with a white shirt, crispy orange, and none of it was wrinkled, all in preparation to look your best and perform your best. Miss Grissom had the skirts specially made so that we would turn the corner and the skirts would snap on cue. To commands like, dress, right, dress, as we marched to the cheers of our fellow students, we were something to see. Each year, when we began as 6th graders, you were qualified to go to an annual safety patrol parade that was held in Washington, D.C. You and your fellow patrols would march down Pennsylvania Avenue in the parade along with other patrols from our state. At the end of the parade, the patrol would take a picture on the steps and of the U.S. Capitol with their chaperones, many of which were Durham Black teachers or police officers at that time. The year I became a 6th grader was the same year of the riots in the D.C. after the death of Martin Luther King. And because of the possibility of danger, it was determined we would not travel to D.C. Instead, we'd have a picnic outside C.C. Spalding School. I must say, I do regret not having my picture taken on the steps of the Capitol. If you want to see these actual pictures and the exhibits of the pictures that you've been seeing so far in this presentation, go to the Community Family Life and Recreation Center. It is located in its foyer. What I want to make sure, and we can go to the next slide, is the importance of saying that none of the people that lived in these communities were caricatures. They were special. They brought education. They believed in making sure that we all were a part of this magnificent village. And as a result, a lot of great heroes and people came out of this community. And I'll pass it on to Barbara to talk a little bit about some of them.
Yeah, so quickly, thank you so much, Mamie. Those stories really make these places alive, give them so much meaning. Last year, we were able to work with the Carroll Street Festival group, former residents, and the images you'll see in the next couple slides, feel free, Kimmy, here, are from a coloring book, and they lift up several people that grew up in the West End, judges and civil rights activists, musicians, and business owners. And one of the people that the neighborhood has encouraged us to lift up so much is Pauli Murray. That's good. Next slide. whose family helped to actually found the West End, and whose great uncle Richard Fitzgerald, who was one of the founders of Black Wall Street, bought property, subdivided it, sold it to other people, and helped to actually create the residential neighborhood. Pauli Murray, an amazing 20th century human rights activist who also became an Episcopal priest. We're going to buzz through these pretty quickly. She came here in 1914 to live with her grandparents. Robert Fitzgerald was the first of his family, after serving in the Civil War as a free African American, to come south as an educator. He met his wife Cornelia in Hillsborough. She was born in enslavement. They had 6 children. This is a picture of their 4 daughters and their house that they built on a 1-acre homestead in 1898 on Carroll Street. Next slide. One of the things that's so exciting is that we have been able to save that house. So you get to see just a little bit of the renovation with a tool created by the Quality of Life Project, which you'll hear more about. We were able to purchase the house and keep it from becoming a parking lot. And together with family members and all sorts of organizations across Durham, we were able to save it, and thus became the Pauli Murray Center for History and Social Justice. Next slide, please.
1 minute.
Thank you. So this is all available on our website, paulimurraycenter.com, but Pauli challenged boundaries and boxes wherever she went. She challenged segregation. She was a legal theorist. She founded organizations. Next slide, please. She was referred to by her friend Eleanor Roosevelt as her young firebrand friend. There's now a college named after her at Yale because she was the first person to get the JSD degree there. And we've heard about her a lot in the recent post, because her work in 1964 to include sex in the 1964 Civil Rights Act is the basis that the Supreme Court has been using around LGBTQ rights cases recently. Next slide. She was also somebody who really personified the values of her family. She believed in education. She earned many degrees: an undergraduate degree from Hunter, law degrees from Howard, the University of California, University of California, Berkeley, Bolt School of Law, also the Yale University, and then went on to earn divinity degrees. She published several books, all of which are still in print, which is really exciting given that she died in 1985. Next slide, please. And in 1977 at the National Cathedral, she became the first African-American woman to be ordained an Episcopal priest. Next slide, please. So one of the ways you might see Pauli around town is in this series of murals, also a collaborative project with the Southwest Central Durham Quality of Life Project, and something that lifts up not just Pauli's personification, her vision, but also her words. Next slide, please. We began that journey of bringing that house to greater recognition. First, it was named a national treasure by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. With support from Iron Mountain. Next slide. We were able to do a lot of renovation in the house. And in 2016, it was named a National Historic Landmark. Next slide, please. Which it is North Carolina's 39th, the first one in the United States focused on an African-American woman who is also LGBTQ. We hope to open the interior of that house to the public in 2021, and the rest of the site within a couple of years after that. We're on Carroll Street. You're welcome to visit. There's actually an installation on the lawn. And again, next slide. We'd like to invite you to read more about Pauli Murray and to check out our new website where there are a lot more resources. This has been a really important success story for the Quality of Life Project, which again, you'll hear a little bit more about in a few minutes. But happy to be in contact with any of you that would like to be on our mailing list and learn more. Our information is here and on the website. Thank you. Sorry, Joan, we tried.
Thank you so much, Mamie and Barbara. That was just a phenomenal way to start things off, and we're so grateful to each of you for your just the depth of your commitment to and knowledge and expertise about Durham. So thank you all so much. I am now excited to turn it over to our colleagues at North Carolina Central University, who are going to be giving us a brief history of Black Durham and Black Wall Street specifically. I would like to ask briefly that they get the chance to introduce themselves. So Ms. Herbert and Dr. Johnson, would you like to just say hello to everyone and introduce yourselves before I turn it over to Jeffrey and Kiri?
Be glad to do so. I'll follow Colleen.
Ms. Herbert?
Or maybe I won't follow Colleen. Let me say good morning to everyone. I really enjoyed the presentation that Barbara and Mamie just gave on the West End and on Black Durham. There's so much great work going on. I'm Dr. Charles Johnson. I direct a public history program at North Carolina Central University. Was born and raised in Durham, born in the Black Hospital in Durham. In fact, my father is an African-American physician and is recognized by Duke University as its first African-American member of the senior medical faculty at Duke University. And he came here from Washington, D.C., from Howard University because of Lincoln Hospital and the opportunity that it afforded to African-American physicians to receive training. But this morning, I'm excited to introduce a couple of students that I have that are just starting out, and Jeffrey Gadsden and Kyrie Mason. I've been doing a lot of work since I returned to North Carolina Central in 2015 as fast as I can to try to help preserve what I think is a very unique and very special history of this community. And there's so many things I'd like to say, and maybe I'll get to circle back and say them, but I don't want to take up their time. But I'll ask you to bear with them. We're going to use some technology to give a tour. They are first-year students, and I'm so happy that they agreed to do this and to get this experience. So I think I saw Colleen jump in, but after she has a chance to introduce herself, Jeff and Kyrie will share their presentation. Thank you.
Sure. Good morning. I'm Colleen Herbert, and I have the pleasure to serve as the director for the Office of Community Engagement and Service at North Carolina Central University. I was going to, introduce Kyrie and Jeffrey. Kyrie is a first-year student, as Dr. Johnson mentioned, with his area of study being that of Latin American and diasporic history. And past graduation, he plans to pursue a doctorate degree. Jeffrey Gadsden has an interest or study for Black attorneys from the period of 1925 to 1975. And after completing his studies, he plans to attend law school. So I'm turning it over to you, Kyrie and Jeffrey.
All right, thank you very much for that introduction, Dr. Johnson and Ms. Herbert. Honestly, we can jump right into it. So we had already talked a little bit about Stagville Plantation, but just to give you guys a visual representation of the place, we'll start with this overview map. So looking at the northeast here, you see this giant red spot. If it looks like a wound, that's because in many ways that's what it is, right? At its peak, as we had heard, this is over 30,000 acres with over 900 people, enslaved within, right? And as was kind of alluded to, this is one of the first Black communities in the area, if you want to call it that, but not in a celebratory sense, but in the sense that these are people very much forced to make do with what they have available to them under the conditions of slavery, right? What we call Stagville Plantation, if you want to go on to the next slide, is actually the collection of 3 different properties, right? So the first section of it is the Snow Hill Plantation, which is this southwestern portion, which is started in the 1750s by William Johnston. Later on, in 1768, William Johnston invites Richard Benahan down to participate with him in the establishment of his general store. Eventually, Richard Benahan will buy out William Johnston and go on to acquire the rest of what we call Stagville. Going on to the next slide is the eponymous Stagville, right? This is the land that Richard Benahan buys and eventually combines with the Cameron family to exert more influence over the territory, right? So one of the most important things I think to talk about when we're talking about Stagville and its impact on the communities which would be formed in Durham eventually, right, is that a lot of the families and a lot of the individuals which are coming and not only participating in these communities, but also founding a lot of the institutions which would be important to Stagville, or well, which would be important to Durham and Durham's Black population, right? These are people that are coming directly out of Stagville. So if you see any names such as the Amoses, the Bells, the Bryants, the Holmans, the Holloways, Umstead, Harrises, etc., right? These are all family names which are coming directly out of the Stagville Plantation. The picture that we had actually seen in the prior presentation is actually the Holman House, if I'm not mistaken, right? So, you know, that's a direct link to families which still exist in Durham to this day, right? If we go on to the next slide, we see the southern plantation lands, which for the most part are underwater at this point. If you've ever driven north on 85 or been to Falls Lake or anything like that, right, you're driving directly over former plantation land, right? And this is a trend which we will get to later on when we start talking about Hayti, but this covering over of Black communities is something which has precedent here as it does in other places, right? So, I mean, as you can very clearly see, this is the complete, almost not the complete, but the almost complete covering of a place where people not only lived and worked, but also suffered and survived through the experience of slavery, which is in many ways which is something we'll continue to see as we talk about Black Durham and its history, right? Going on to the next slide, we had already talked a bit about West End, but another one of the communities has been, I guess, alluded to is the Hayti community, which is one of the most prominent Black communities in the state, in the country, in fact, due to its large economic base, right? And there are a lot of other, communities throughout Durham which are important. I would like to mention Bragtown. I would like to mention Old North Durham or Walltown, right? Like, we talk a lot about Hayti, but never forget that there are other Black communities scattered throughout the city that also have a lot of prominent figures and institutions coming out of them. But Hayti is the one which we're going to focus on today. The thing that made Hayti special, right, is its self-sustainable quality. So looking at the map here, you see this black line jetting down. You see this black line kind of jetting down the community, right? And this is the old Fayetteville Street. This is the original Fayetteville Street before it was moved in the process of urban renewal in the 60s. But originally, this Fayetteville Street acted as the main conduit or the main base for not only the institutions which would populate Hayti, but also as the home for a lot of those institution builders, right? So even though the map doesn't show it, if you go further down Hayti, or not further down Hayti, but further down Fayetteville Street, you'll see a lot of, these giant kind of two-story homes, which is where these people, lived and worked and, established and made this community what it was, right? On Fayetteville Street, there were a host of businesses and educational institutions. So further down Fayetteville Street, you have North Carolina Central University. You have the site of the old Lincoln Hospital, which is now the Lincoln Community Health Center. You have a beauty college at the northern part. You used to have a business college as well, and a host of churches which served as anchors for the community. But if you want to go on to the next slide, Jeff. The thing about Hayti is that even though it kind of maintains its geographic shape to a certain extent, right, its character has changed over time. Luckily for this part, we don't necessarily have to be bound to the map, but as I had mentioned, this is the original Fayetteville Street, and off to this this side here, right?
Excuse me one sec. Jeff, are you controlling the presentation? Can we go back to the slides? Let's stick to the slides, please. Go ahead, Kyrie.
Yeah, as it had been saying, you can see the original, you can see the original Fayetteville Street running through the center of the community. But if you look to this left portion here, you can see what Fayetteville Street is now. And as I had mentioned earlier, Fayetteville Street moves during this process of urban renewal, right? So originally, while Fayetteville Street was home to a host of, the vital centers of the community, in the process of urban renewal, a lot of those things are shifted and moved, right? So the first process of this changing, if you could go on to the next slide, Jeff. Okay. A lot of the changes which would come are initiated by urban renewal, which gets its start with the addition of the freeway, which is, as you can see now, is at the northern part of the community and kind of jets through the middle of it. And this is a picture here of like what old Fayetteville Street used to be, right on the right. This is what it is what it is now to the left. You can see in this process of changing the streets, you lose a lot of the character that the community once had. So in this process of urban renewal, of adding the freeway, right, you have to disrupt the community in the process of construction, but also in adding the freeway, you also have to change the main street as well, right, which is why it is as empty as it is today. And in many ways, you look down the street and it's just a dead end, whereas before it ran directly through into downtown. Going on to the next slide, this in many ways is a continuation of what we see in the covering of the Southern plantation lands, right? Like this is the pattern which we've gotten used to at this point of the powers that be, so to say, taking into not really taking into consideration the community that is already there and the historic significance of the community that they intend to work over for their own purposes, right? I'm going to transition it over to Mr. Gadsden so he can talk to you guys a little bit about the figures and some of the specific economic institutions which came out of the Hayti community. Thank you very much.
You're gonna have to unmute, Jeff.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yes. Oh, wonderful. Good morning and thank you, Kyrie. I am honored to be here and delighted to be speaking with you this morning. And this is an image of Parish Street in Durham. And on the right, we have a picture of Dr. John Merrick, Charles Clinton Spalding in the middle, and Dr. Aaron McDuffie on the right. And Paris Street during the Jim Crow era was known as Black Wall Street. And Black Wall Street was a reference to the New York district's New York Stock Exchange and other prominent institutions in the nation. And in 1906, North Carolina Mutual Company, insurance company, moved its headquarters to Paris Street. And I just want to point out that this building here is the same as this one in the picture on the right. And so not only did they move North Carolina Mutual to Paris Street, they also moved Mechanics and Farmers Bank, which is a black bank, and other real estate and textiles. And in 1912, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois came to Durham and praised the African-American entrepreneurs. And like Kyrie just said a few minutes ago, in the 1960s, urban renewal wiped out much of the Hayti community. So this next slide is North Carolina Mutual Insurance Company. And again, it was the first Black-owned insurance agency in the state and the largest in the nation. And North Carolina Mutual received its Articles of Incorporation February 28, 1899. And the institution served as a catalyst for minority and social economic development through jobs, investments, loans, contributions, and support for social programs. And North Carolina Mutual, the organizers, all of the original organizers left the first year except for American Moore. And Charles Clinton Spalding was hired as the general manager of the company, and they moved to a two-room building on East Main Street. And in 1904, the agency hired its first out-of-state agent and moved its headquarters to 114th Paris Street. Now, in this next slide, we have the site of the old Lincoln Hospital. And Lincoln Hospital was founded by Dr. Aaron McDuffie Moore with assistance of members of the African American and the white community in Durham. And it was a hospital for African Americans, and they established it in 1901. And the final location of the Lincoln Hospital was the location facing Fayetteville Street. And numerous Black physicians, nurses, and allied professionals were able to gain much needed medical training, while African Americans across the region were able to get quality professional medical care. And this hospital was closed in 1976 when Durham County General Hospital, which was an integrated hospital, integrated medical facility, opened in Northern Durham. And Dr. Charles D. Watts, Dr. Charles Johnson, and others opened the Lincoln Health Center in 1971. It coexisted with the hospital until its closing and is in the approximate location of the former hospital today. And this next slide, we have this is an overview of North Carolina Central University. And on the right, we have an older image of North Carolina Central University. And this is an image of the National Religious Training School in Chautauqua in Durham, which is now known as NCCU, North Carolina Central University. And Dr. James E. Shepard, this is the administration building here, and the name was changed in 2019 from the Hoey Administration Building to the James E. Shepard Administration Building. And he was born in Raleigh, North Carolina, to Reverend Augustus and Hattie Whitted Shepard. And he attended the public schools in Raleigh. And he also attended Shaw University and received a degree in pharmacy in 1894. After getting his degree in pharmacy, he opened up a pharmacy in Durham. And in 1910, he founded the National Religious Training School in Chautauqua in Durham. And this is North Carolina Central University. It was the first supported liberal arts college for African American students in North Carolina. And its purpose was to develop young African American men and women into citizens with fine character and sound academic training. And in 1915, the school was sold and renamed North Carolina College for Negroes. And the school graduated its first class as a four-year college in 1929 as a result of the sincere interest of Governor Agnes W. McLean and generous gifts from Durham industrialist and philanthropist Benjamin N. Duke.
1 minute remaining.
Okay, in 1939, let's go into the secret game. And this is North Carolina Central University's gymnasium, the McClendon-McDougal Gymnasium. And in 1944, the college, North Carolina College of Negroes played a secret basketball game against white students enrolled in middle school program at Duke University. And the game occurred 30 years before some teams in the ACC got their first black players. The game was played on a Sunday morning in a locked gymnasium, and only the players, the referee, and the scorekeeper were allowed in the gymnasium. And that was an image to the right of the basketball players. And that's Mr. McClendon. He created the fast break and won many championships. And finally, we have the law school there, and Albert Turner was the first dean of the law school. And lastly, we have the history department on North Carolina Central campus right here, and it was named after Dr. Helen Edmonds, and she was the first African-American woman to earn her doctoral degree from Ohio State University. And in 1938, she received her master's from the Ohio State University. And finally, she joined in 1941 the faculty at North Carolina College. And she remained there until she retired in 1977. And she served as the chair of the department, dean of the graduate school, and university distinguished professor. Thank you, and everyone have a great day.
Okay, let me, if I can, just real quick, say thanks first and foremost to Jeffrey and to Kyrie for their presentation. There are a few things I'd like to kind of emphasize in there. There has been a long-standing relationship between Duke University and North Carolina Central University. And, you know, Walter Ware, in writing about North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, talks about the Durham spirit. And when he speaks on it, he's really talking about all of these people that Kyrie and Jeff mentioned, who are institution builders in Durham, and their sense of industry and ambition and so forth. But what really is at the heart of this Durham spirit was a willingness to collaborate. To work literally across communities, and that is, to me, what as I'm researching Black Durham, what really made it go. And there's so many ways that we could show that, but the land, for example, that North Carolina, the National Religious Training School in Chautauqua, which is today North Carolina Central University, was built on, was purchased at an extremely reasonable rate from the Duke family. The community right across the street from it that would grow up and become this fabulous community of College Heights the exact same thing that was purchased from Brody Leonidas Duke. And many of the institutions, it was very difficult at this time for African Americans to get into politics, but they could get into business if they had the means to do so. And the Duke family and others gave money to help start institutions, and they worked together over a very long period of time. And that has helped to contribute to the development of what will become, I would say, in terms of speaking economically, the preeminent Black community in the United States for much of the 20th century. It certainly had the strongest economic base for any Black community in the United States because of all of these different institutions. So if there's something that you leave here with, to me, what would be really important to take away is those ties that have bound us across time and the short distance that's between us in terms of how we have worked together to make this the best possible place that we could. You know, I often think about, you hear about Tulsa and the Black Wall Street and Tulsa, Oklahoma, and John Hope Franklin, who had shared time at both North Carolina College and at Duke University, who was arguably the preeminent African-American historian of the 20th century, talked about Tulsa and the Black Wall Street there, but he said, man, it wasn't what was here in Durham because of all of the institutions that were here economically to support the Black community. But we saw what happened in Tulsa and in other communities like that, you know, where whites came in and destroyed those communities. There had to be, I can't find the document to prove it, but there had to be someone here who kept, let's say, the crazies at bay to allow the Black Wall Street to exist here in Durham on West Parish Street and so forth for as long as it did. So there has been this, again, these long-lasting ties between these two communities. I'd like to say thank you to Kimmy for inviting us to participate. And, you know, there's one other thing. I just have to tell you, North Carolina Central did win the secret game. The students didn't add that, but let me go ahead and put that plug in. But the reality is that the real victory, I think humanity won that day, right? So I think that was the bigger victory. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, as well as Kyrie and Jeff. That was just incredible thank you for bringing really an aerial tour of Durham to all of us. It was with such a rich history. Thank you so very much. It's very hard to not be together and to do the in-person tour. So thank you for bringing that to all of us today. That was very remarkable. So thank each of you. So with where we are right now, folks, we do want to invite you to just maybe take a 1-minute break to move, stretch a little bit. Please, you know, as the presentations keep going, please use the restroom if needed, take care of yourselves. But we are going to, so we have time for breakouts, move into Bethsaida Fernandez's presentation about the Latinx community in Durham. So I'm going to go ahead and shift gears and share screens again so Bethsaida can start her presentation. But we will be doing breakouts in about another half hour or so that you all have time to digest and sort of talk about these different themes that we're learning about today together.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I start right now then, Kim?
Yes, you can go ahead, Bethsaida. That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning still to everyone, and thank you for the invitation, Kimmy. My name is Bethsaida Fernandez, and I am part of the Roman Studies Department in the Spanish language program. And what I am going to do this morning is really briefly share some of the, a little bit of information about Latinos in Durham, some of the demographics and some of the sites, gathering places for the Latino population here. And I am going to share with you a few of the images that are that I have gathered also along with my students through my course, Latino Lives and Experiences in North Carolina and Beyond. And I would like to start with an overall data of the Latino population in the United States. And as you can see, we have grown quite a bit, and we keep on growing through the decades. And at this point, we're at 18.5% of the national population. And one of the characteristics of this community is the youth. It's a very young community, and also the power that they're beginning to have politically. And right now, speaking of politics, right now we have 15% of Latinos being able to vote, which is an increase from 4 years ago only. And many of these Latinos are in what is known as battleground states. And therefore, this is becoming more and more important at the national level. And next. And here we have, I just wanted to show you visually very quickly some of the growth of the Latino community, beginning from the 1.2% in the 1990s all the way to 2010 when we reached 8.4, and to be now, next slide, to be now at 9.6% of the population of North Carolina. And one important thing to consider about this population is that these are 60% of that population is US born. And that is important to note. 6 in 10 Latinos in North Carolina are US citizens. And most of the population, the origin is Mexican. However, we have also people from the Caribbean, mainly from Puerto Rico, and the other percentage, majority, comes from Central America, specifically from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. So that is also a very important number to consider. And as you can see there, near Durham in Wake County, we have also a large concentration of the population. Next. From the national to the state, and now we get to Durham, and we have a population of 13.2% in Durham. And again, that continues to grow steadily. And one of the last number that I found from the DPS, which is a good census to consider the children in school, show that 31% of the students at DPS identify themselves as Latinos or Hispanic. I'm using the term. Next. I just wanted to say a word about the languages, and considering that Durham is being seen as such a diverse place, and one of those things can be noticed through the languages that are spoken here. And this is some of the latest data that I could find regarding languages in Durham. And the thing to notice is that the Spanish language is the second language spoken after English. And that has to do, also is connected with the largest group of people that have, that speak. The largest group of people being Latinos of Latino descent. That was just an illustration to show, and as I go around parks and little trails sometimes in my running, I've noticed more and more this type of signals that used to be only in schools, and I used to see them in the hospitals, and now we're seeing them in social spaces. And that it kind of shows also how important it is to have the Latino community to inform them in their own language, and how important it is to reach the spaces that they are using to communicate things, like in this case, well, with the COVID situation, it's very important that everybody gets the information in the language that they understand. So I just wanted to illustrate that with that picture that I took a few days ago. I found this picture, and I found it very descriptive of the way we see Durham nowadays, and it has been called the cultural capital of the Triangle. And that has to do with the changing face, with it includes, of course, the Latino community, but there's also population from many other different regions, non-Spanish speaking, but concentrating on the Latino community or communities, actually, we can see that there is a great variety of origins, of geographical locations represented in Durham, which has also added to the flavor and the color and the arts that are presented now in the county. One community that I did not want to pass as we speak about the communities represented in Durham, and even though this is a little bit away from Durham, I wanted to focus some attention to this population of the migrant workers. And this is some of the places that I visit with my course that I mentioned at the beginning. And it's only an hour and 20 minutes away from Durham. And even though it is a population that doesn't navigate the city, meaning they are not allowed to leave these living quarters, they are still part of the population, and one of the reasons why also families started to move here, beginning with workers and then moving in families, relatives to work in the fields, and then leaving the fields and settling in more closer to the city after some time. But I just wanted to mention some of the facts that are behind the migrant workers, and they are still a community that needs much support and better conditions for the work that they do, and that it's also notable to say how important they are for the agricultural industry and for the economic growth of North Carolina. And I just also wanted to mention, the fact that in North Carolina, the law says that the children have to be 12 years old to work in the fields. However, you can find children as young as 6 years old in working in the fields now here. Moving from the fields to here, more into the city, we can probably see more of these. We're seeing more art being displayed. We're seeing more films in Spanish. We're seeing more Latino residents being involved in different movements, in different spheres of the city, such as schools, art, film, as I mentioned. And this is all coming after probably the first center was opened as a resource for the Latino community, which was El Centro Hispano, which opened with a different name. I think it was Spanish Resource Center in the early 90s. And it was opened because of the growth of the population. And this was the first stop for the Latino community that was coming in to gather information, assistance, support. With the growth of the population, really at the end of the 90s, this resource center became El Centro Hispano, which has always been a very important place for the Latino community. However, there are many other institutions and organizations that have opened since then because of the growth of the population. Next. And as we are represented in the arts and in film and in history and in the schools, we also have the latest addition of the Latino representation in politics, in the political local sphere, with Javiera Caballero, who became the first Latino person and woman city council member this past year. And it is going to be there until 2023. So that also shows a little bit of the movement and a little bit of the impact and the visibility that the Latino community is having in Durham. And we are going to, I'm going to expand on these 3 pictures that I just wanted to mention briefly, that with my class, I go into the community and with the students and participate in different sites and different events that are geared to bring in the Latino community, bring them together, and share their art, their culture, their language. And three of these, one event that is very important is this annual event called La Fiesta del Pueblo, which is held in September of every year. And another place of importance for the Latino community that has also grown is churches in general, but here I have Immaculate Conception here in Durham. But there are many churches around North Carolina that are very interested in bringing in and supporting the Latino community and opening up spaces for them to gather as well and be supportive. And also the Green Flea Market, which is known not just by the Latino community, but other people are also participating in going there for food, for family reunions, for shopping, all kinds of things. And so these students, I'm gonna finish up this short talk with a video that the students from this class created a couple of years ago, where they wanted to showcase some of the places that are part of Durham, but also those that are specifically important for the Latino community and that showcase their language and their cultures. So we can finish up with that, Kimmy, if you can. Thank you. There is no sound, Kimmy. Well, I don't hear it. I'm not sure if people are hearing it.
I think I had to unmute myself.
When you think of communal spaces in Durham, North Carolina, what do you think of? Maybe you think of trendy bars and restaurants downtown, the Durham Performing Arts Center, the Durham Bulls Athletic Park, the Farmers Market, or maybe the Duke Gardens. But what other community spaces are there in Durham, and who do they serve? Durham is incredibly diverse, and a large part of that diversity comes from its vibrant Latino community. Over 36,000 Latinos, 13% of Durham's population, call the city home. And while they might frequent many of the same places that you do, there are other public spaces you might have never heard of that are central to this culturally rich community of Durhamites. The Durham Green Flea Market, commonly called La Pulga, is a year-round flea market located in East Durham. It is open from 7 a.m. until 4 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday and is a popular gathering spot for members of the Latino community, especially on Sundays after church. For many who visit the market every week, trips to La Pulga are a family tradition. Vendors at the flea market sell almost everything, including clothing, toys, novelties, cell phone accessories, appliances, incense and body oils, crafts, and tools. Check out the food vendors to try a variety of foods, like elote, tornados, champurrado, and churros. You can also purchase quality produce, like prickly pear, that are not often sold at many grocery stores. The Durham Green Flea Market, La Pulga, is a prime example of a central hub of Durham's vibrant Latino community. You can visit the market on weekends at 1600 East Pettigrew Street, or check out their website at durhamgreenfleamarket.com. For many Latinos, religion is an integral part of culture and daily life. The Immaculate Conception Catholic Church on West Chapel Hill Street provides an important space for Latinos to practice their faith, spend time with family, and join together with the larger Latino community in Durham. In addition to numerous weekly English masses, Immaculate Conception holds masses in Spanish on Thursday and Sundays. The church also provides weekly faith formation sessions, monthly food drives, and numerous other church-sponsored service opportunities. Immaculate Conception is also committed to social justice work, with committees dedicated to immigration reform, homelessness and housing, and environmental leadership within the congregation. The Immaculate Conception Catholic Church is a welcoming community, and services in both English and Spanish are open to all. If you want to learn more or find a time to attend a service, visit their website, icdurham.org. Since 1994, La Fiesta del Pueblo has provided an annual opportunity for Latinos from across the Triangle to come together and celebrate the Latino presence and culture in North Carolina. La Fiesta is a free all-day event, and in recent years, it has taken place in September on Fayetteville Street in Raleigh. Each year, around 20,000 North Carolina residents attend the festival, sampling different foods, visiting the vendors and informational tents, and enjoying the variety of music and dance performances. The festival also provides an important platform for Latinos to bring awareness to some of the issues currently facing their community. Even though it does not take place in Durham, La Fiesta del Pueblo is a great opportunity to learn about the local Latino community that is making crucial contributions economically and culturally to our city and our state. For more information about the next festival, visit El Pueblo's website, elpueblo.org. So when you think of Durham and its public spaces, we hope you will think of the Latino community here and the spaces that allow that community to thrive. They, we, all of us make up the fabric of Durham.
Okay, well, thank you. I think I'm gonna finish the presentation with that, and I hope you enjoy go and visit some of these places soon.
Thank you so much, Bethsaida. We really appreciate the context and focus on the Latinx community. And if anyone is interested in learning more about the course, it is featured on the Duke Service Learning website, Spanish 313. So you can learn more about the course and what they do, but this was actually a video produced by students in the course. So we are now, thank you, Bethsaida, going to go into our final presenters of the day, Sam Millerese and Mamie Webb-Bledsoe again. So I'd like to turn it over to them to tell us a little bit about the story of Duke and Durham. And then we hope you will continue sticking around for a little longer. We will do our breakout sessions after that. So Sam and Mamie.
Thank you, Kimmy. This is Sam Millerese, and Mamie and I will spend some moments on the institutional perspective of the history of the Duke-Durham relationship. Both of us have been involved in the Duke-Durham Neighborhood Partnership for 20 years, and I think both of us have a real sense of the evolution and the history of Duke's involvement with Durham and Durham's formation of Duke, really, over these years. It's interesting that we're having this dialogue today because tomorrow the Duke Board of Trustees begins a year-long task force on a Duke Durham for tomorrow. So I think this is fascinating. I wish that we would be able to offer them a copy of this presentation today to give them some history and a real context for the diversity and the dynamism of our city and its history. I'm going to give a general overview, and I think following that, Mamie's going to be more specific and give you a real sense of the empowerment strategy that has been at work in our office over the years, and she will focus specifically on the Quality of Life Project and its impact, as already has been mentioned by Barbara Lau, on the West End in particular, and its overflow into the larger community. First of all, let me just say, for the newest members of those who are participating, who've just come to Duke, that, you know, our identity as a university has been captured in these themes. Durham is Duke's home. Duke is a research university, and in fact, all of you in some way or another, from academics to student affairs to all the other support services and institutes, are part of that university complex. Duke is also a health system. Duke is also the largest employer in Durham and second largest in the state. And Duke wants to be, I hope this shows in my brief presentation, a good neighbor and a good corporate citizen. That being said, let me move on to give you a real sense of this story. The history of Duke's involvement with Durham is for many years, for decades, in fact, was diffused. The arrival of President Cohen in 1994, our efforts became more focused and took on a larger and higher profile in the community. Following this slide, you're going to see a map. Duke began to develop a series of partnerships in the late 90s under the influence of a review by Bill Bell and Sandy Ogborn to develop a partnership with the 12 neighborhoods near Duke's campus and with the 8 public schools that serve them. This is meant to be a mutually beneficial reality for both parties so that we do respect the voice of the community as well as offer Duke's expertise, resources, and technical assistance in the ways in which we support their established priorities. The focus has been on quality of life issues, and this was very deliberate. And this initiative became the centerpiece for 2 strategic plans and really the heart of the Duke-Durham civic engagement model. The next slide. The Duke-Durham Neighborhood Partnership really is focused around community development concerns. And Mamie is our Assistant Vice President for Community Development. In some ways, all of those concerns touch public education, affordable housing, youth empowerment, access to quality, affordable healthcare, nonprofit support, faith-based collaborations, and all of these, in some way or another, within that geographical footprint, were at the heart of the partnership's outreach. The creation of the partnership was a strategic decision by Duke's administration and our board of trustees, formed to elevate relations with Durham with a structured focus. And in fact, it's proven to be a major step forward and has been the basis for expansion, new outreach, and successful partnerships. The partnerships benefited Duke by building trust and by delivering on commitments in the face of a history of perceived institutional arrogance and isolation, especially from the perspective of our African American neighbors in low wealth communities. This is particularly true of our hospital and health system. But there's been a real shift in the Duke-Durham relations narrative from an isolated private university and health system to a genuine partner and neighbor. We have partnered in various capacities with nearly all of Duke's 10 schools to support and balance the university's commitment to economic development with the work of community development. But I really wanted to say this, since Kimmy and David and the rest of their team are very much a part of creating a sense of civic involvement with our students. Early on, the focus of Duke's civic involvement was with student engagement. The Community Service Center, field-based learning and service learning that you just heard about, Heart Leadership in Public Policy, Duke student tutors all over our public school system indicate that the first real energy of civic engagement began with our undergraduates. I think this is true today, but it also includes, as I notice on the board below, with our law school, our many engaged professional school students, I think as noted in that slide. So I just want to say that the creation of the partnership in 1996 and fully reorganized in 1998-99 represented a strategic refocus of Duke's commitment to Durham, starting with the neighborhoods closest to the campus. I just want to say that as we move forward with revisioning and reevaluating where we've been with where we want to go, I'm hopeful that the specific work of this overview will help you understand that our office would love to become a sort of a traffic cop, a hub, a link that helps different community offices and agencies to end up with an opportunity for us to direct you to the right place to accomplish your goals. It's a very complex ecosystem at Duke, but I hope that we're able to kind of direct folks to do that. But I think it's important for you to know in this general overview that the empowerment strategy is best understood by the grassroots work that we've done in Walltown and in Southwest Central Durham. So maybe why don't you pick up and run with it? Thank you all.
Sure. Hello again, everyone. I wanted to spend some time just to zero in on Southwest Central Durham Quality of Life Project and what made it a little different. In the late 1990s, all of our neighborhoods, particularly in the urban areas, were experiencing a lot of crime, a lot of disinvestment. In some cases, we had a lot of weedy lots and boarded up homes in the Southwest Central Durham side of the 12 neighborhoods. And when we talked about it with the community people, they had their own ideas of what they thought their community should look like, should address certain issues as it related to their quality of life. Initially, there was not a lot of trust in these communities. And what we found is that it was more important for us to work with and alongside these community leaders to help reach some of the goals that we hope we could make a difference in our quality of life. So 6 neighborhoods: Birch Avenue, Lyon Park, West End, Lakewood Tuscaloosa, Lakewood Park, Moorhead Hills. All 6 neighborhoods and the West End worked together to kind of figure out how they could improve their quality of life if they collectively shared the work together. And as a result, they thought that there were certain founding principles that would be important for us to work alongside Duke. One, that the entire community shared responsibility for all of its quality of life. So if Duke was going to be a neighbor, then it could be a part of that work. Relationships and collaborations are forces that are for positive change. And that was important to create better relationships because we did not have that level of trust in these 6 neighborhoods that were on the west side of Duke. Many of the Duke members of the Duke community were not as familiar with the neighborhoods that were in the Southwest Central Durham group. So it was important for us to understand its history and the landscape. So history is linked to be an important piece that would allow for an inclusive vision to come to fruition. And community members wanted to shape their own destiny, and they wanted to build this capacity that overall it was on them to sustain, not just Duke, but the community and the members that served it. There were 120 some ideas that came out of these 6 neighborhoods as places that we could start work. But out of them, there were 4 areas that they landed on as being areas of concern and where they wanted to work. Affordable housing, to get rid of some of the weedy lots, the things that we had seen in the community that did not make it feel as welcoming as it used to be. The economic development, we had quite a few commercial strips. Lakewood, we had the 15501 corridor as well as West Chapel Hill Street. And it was important to revitalize Chapel Hill Street. I said I grew up here. I remember when there was Don Dogs and the bakery that was on West Chapel Hill Street. Many of you would probably not know that they existed. So again, revitalizing those economic corridors and have them provide more positive quality of life. Nonprofit sustainability. It was important that these communities that had nonprofit organizations that served the community, that provided jobs, that they would remain healthy and that they would also be part of this rich village, and that we figure out ways to help sustain them. And finally, more than anything, we probably never would have figured this out if it didn't come from the community. The importance of history and celebrations and traditions. Next slide. We accomplished quite a bit in these 6 neighborhoods together. affordable housing. We were able to build 40-some new units of affordable housing. Some were houses, some were duplexes. We also had 32 units of senior housing. We looked at housing comprehensively with the community. They wanted to age in place. They wanted to see themselves, even if they would have to downsize, maybe staying in the community, not far from their friends and family. Economic development was important. Kent Corner is a great example. We did charrettes at the Emily K Center with over 100 people from all over these 6 neighborhoods to talk about what did they want to see on West Chapel Hill Street. How could we bring it back to life? As you see, the Durham Co-op market, as well as the other kinds of activities that are now present on the street. Nonprofit sustainability, we met as various nonprofits on a quarterly basis to talk about issues that were important to us. And then history and celebrations. Yes, we purchased housing and we were hoping to make most of it affordable housing, but we were also important in preserving the history, helping people remember who lived here, what was important to the people that grew up in this space, and how would these people be a part of the new community or whatever we're going to create together now that we were working collectively. Next slide. I think what we would say that all of this allowed the community themselves to come together at the table with people that they may not have often done that with other neighborhood members, with Duke, with other institutions and banks that we might partner with, but together they determine their destiny. And for many of you, you see the results of their work. And that's what I would add. That's it. Sam, if you want to close
Mamie,
us out.
I think though it's important for you to say something about TOPS, Mamie, just because that's been such a key piece. Sorry.
It's okay. One of the things that Barbara just mentioned was the importance of the methods that we use to bring everyone to the table. The methodology that was used is called technology of participation. This was something that was developed back in the 1960s that was used all over the world to bring consensus, where there was little resources, or there may not have been a classroom available, but a tree or a place where we could all have a conversation, and to begin to have those conversations that build trust, that help build that relationship. The difference in the Southwest Central Durham Quality of Life Project was that we loved conversation. It was important to be inclusive. You will see that the culture not only dealt with conversations and videos and audios that were collected that told the stories or the narratives of many of these people, but it also was a place where people were able to debate, to create together, co-create together, as we think about these complicated issues. And we could not have done that without having a tool like this that allows people to focus their conversation, but to also bring consensus, but not to just let a brainstorming just die, but to create things that actually are objectives and the do, so that people can see themselves in the work and want to participate along with anyone that's at the table. So I hope that helps. You're welcome.
It does. Let me just respond by saying that as the task force is moving ahead with its Durham for Tomorrow, our office, Mamie and I are very involved, is currently involved in creating a plan of action around community impact. So let me just share with you the 5 focus areas that haven't been really fully defined yet, but needed to be at least before you, that makes sense about how we're proceeding under Dr. Stephanie Williams, who, by the way, is a real visionary and is going to be I think, a powerful leader on senior leadership for the university. The first is housing affordability and infrastructure. The second will be early childhood and school readiness. And the third focus was nutrition, health issues, food security. The fourth one is college and career readiness. And the fifth one is in some way collaborating with, supporting, offering resources to our nonprofit community that would create, in some ways, in all these different focus areas, a level of equitable partnerships. So that gives you some sense of where our office stands at this point. We moved from the Duke-Durham Neighborhood Partnership to Durham and Regional Affairs, and then Stephanie Williams arrived in 2008, and now we're Durham and Community Affairs. So if you can keep up with all the change of our names, you can still find both Mamie at this address. So thank you all. Thank you, Mamie. We appreciate it.
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself. Yes, thank you, Mamie and Sam. It's always a pleasure to have you all present, and we just again appreciate the richness and depth of your stories and commitment to Durham. So thank you both. Since we have about 15 minutes left, and our group is a size where we feel that we could actually just all talk together, I am going to actually stop sharing so that we can all see one another. And since there hasn't really been time for questions yet, we wanted to actually open up the floor to questions that you all might have for our amazing presenters, and just open it up for larger discussion here. So if you all have questions about anything you've learned today, you want to learn more about a particular person or site that was featured, or reactions to anything you've learned, we invite you all to just unmute yourselves and comment.
Hi, I guess I'll go. My name is Sean Phillips. I'm happy to be moving to Durham in about a year in the summer of 2021. I'm the spouse of an incoming faculty member, and I've really been appreciating this conversation. In part, we're moving from California, which is a much less or differently diverse place than North Carolina. And as we move, one of the key things for me is our youngest and only remaining non-college kid is an 11-year-old who will be joining a school either in Durham or elsewhere. And I think obviously it was interesting to hear the 5 focuses on the future of Durham that was just mentioned, I believe, by Sam, and 2 of them were around education, one in early development, kindergarten age, and then another one coming into college. And I guess my question is, I'm curious about any thoughts around education and how we integrate the community. I realize that it's kind of an amorphous question, but I think obviously for everyone, educating the next generation is an important topic, and how do we work together in a community to do that? So any thoughts around that, I'm interested to hear about.
Sure, David, you want to start and I can follow up?
Yes, I'll be glad to. Well, it's nice to meet you, and welcome to Duke when you get here. And I'm David Malone. I'd be glad to talk with you over the phone or exchange emails and give you more information. But the Durham Public Schools are is the unit in which Durham children go to public school. And there are several elementary schools near campus, and Duke has a longstanding involvement with those schools. We also have many teacher activists here in Durham. I think we're one of the most active communities nationwide in terms of teacher activism and community school movement. So there's great parent involvement here. And I think our schools are one of the most promising aspects in terms of ways in which people are thinking creatively and innovatively about educating children. But we have many, many Duke undergraduates involved in local schools. And as Sam mentioned in his presentation, that's one of the one of the early driving forces of our relationship with Durham has been our undergraduates. So I can give you my phone number, and if you want to talk more, we can.
Yeah, let me just add that with the restructuring of our office, we definitely have a whole focus on education that runs the continuum from early childhood all the way through to a group called the College Advising Corps, which is 18 graduates of Duke that are currently involved in a variety of different high schools, assisting students in their next decision to higher education. We just got a grant from Jumpstart, and we're going to be dealing with middle school students as well. So our continuum, coupled with program and ed and service learning, Romance language department, and all the different ways in which our undergraduates and professional schools are involved, there's no question that education is a high priority, as well as workforce development, because we have a relationship with Durham Technical Community College, with the business community, and with NCCU, and collaborating around these two issues.
I had a quick question. I was just wondering, like, as someone who just moved to Durham like a month ago, I'd be curious, like, what insights you have about kind of getting to know the area with the COVID situation, and like if that flea market is still open, or if there's I don't know, like how that translates to the current situation. And then the other thing is, I just transferred registering to vote to North Carolina, and I'm also from California actually, and I have opinions about national stuff, but in terms of some of the more local issues, I'm wondering if there's any maybe community groups who have done their research and might know what would be best for the local community. I'd be curious to hear what those might be. Yeah.
I can take just a beginning stab of that, Anita. So Durham is really a city of neighborhoods and listservs, especially for people that have crossed that technological divide. And so thinking about wherever you are now living, thinking about getting on the neighborhood listserv is a huge opening invitation. And you can sometimes even get on the adjacent neighborhood listservs. There are three major sort of community organizations that work in the political arena. Well, maybe I would say four now. One is the People's Alliance, which is, I'll just be blunt, it's sort of the white, liberal, more older. It got a bit of a generation span. People's Alliance certainly has information. The Committee on the Affairs of Black People is historically the organization that worked for civil rights in the African American community. There's also a group called the Friends of Durham, which tends to be a little more business aligned. And then now there's a group called Durham for All, which is more younger progressives. So they all have different agendas, but they all, community engagement in Durham is definitely a large participatory kind of activity for lots of people. Lots of people watch city council meetings on cable television. And so those organizations should be fairly easy to just connect with and get on their listservs, and then you'll hear about protests, you'll hear about meetings, you'll hear about endorsement meetings. You'll be able to read some of the endorsements that are being recommended by some of those folks. Thank you for transferring your voter registration. That's so important. And I hope that if you are a student, you'll encourage other students to do that. Voting is really essential in North Carolina this election cycle for statewide offices, local offices, and national offices. And then I think that's sort of that people-to-people way, through that meeting your neighbors, through that kind of thing that you may be able to do during COVID, and meeting people online is at least a first step into that. Bethsaida, I don't know if the green market is open during COVID. I would be shocked if it was not, just because so much of it is outdoors, but I'll let you answer that question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, before the fall started, I check on these places, and they do have also a website, as it was mentioned in the video. But the flea market is open. They have shorter hours, but it is working Saturday and Sunday. It's usually very very populated on Sundays because they tend to go after church. A lot of the population there, a lot of the community. The church is also open, Immaculate Conception. I'm not sure about other churches, but I checked with them because that's where I would have gone with my students. And the church is having up to 200 members going, have a restriction in the amount of people that can go into the church. And the La Fiesta del Pueblo, which is usually in September, is gonna be held on the 20th of this month on Facebook Live. So my students will be doing that, for example. And I do, I think it's still very much, I haven't gone to the market, but I know that a couple of my students have already gone there beginning this fall, and they went with their masks and they kept their distance from what they told me. But that's something that they chose to do because they did not know about it. As we were talking in the class, it was part of the things they wanted to do. But yeah, so the two are open, and the Facebook Live for a Fiesta del Pueblo. If somebody wants to enjoy some music and some, well, I'm not sure how they're gonna do it. We'll see. I'll be present.
Anita, this is Sam. I think there are two other markets that you might find of real interest. The Farmers Market in downtown Durham Central Park, and the African American Farmers Market that I think it's every other week at the NCC Mutual parking lot. Both are very active, very diverse, and I think I try to go at least once a month to either or both of them, and I think you would find that to be, as already heard, masks, social distancing, but the goodies are really wonderful. So, and it's a great way to kind of be out and about without fear of the pandemic concern.
Thanks for that question, Anita. I also noticed that Lisa in the chat was saying, take a look at the weekly online, The Independent, as another resource. And Lisa, I actually wanted to address one of your earlier questions that we noticed in the chat, where you were asking if the 5 areas that I believe Mamie was discussing were focused on the 12 neighborhoods. But Lisa, feel free to unmute if you wanted to elaborate on your question.
The focus areas that I mentioned or Mamie mentioned?
That you mentioned, Sam, at the very end.
Oh yes, those 5 focus areas are the core commitment that Mamie and I have been involved with over the years, have been in those geographical areas, but Mamie has already expanded her neighborhood outreach to include Bragtown and Southside. But there is an expansion of Duke's commitment to Durham around all 5 focus areas. So it's not just confined any longer to the core commitment. The core commitment is not lost. I think we're going to make sure that's preserved, but clearly to the extent that we have the resources available, we intend to expand as long as we can. But we have so many partners with the city, the county, with developers, with a whole range of folks. And all of us share our efforts on various boards in the community. So those 5 focus areas are at the heart of our current status of priorities around which our office currently is established. We're going to pick up, and this is significant, a new assistant vice president for the health system that's going to be in our office. That's huge. As you know, the hospital system in some ways has been sort of disparately separate from the university. I think this is a major move to bring together our commitment to the community, to social determinants of health around these 5 focus areas that are becoming the basis of our work. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Can I add something? No?
Yes.
Please do.
You can? Okay. I just want to add one more group to Barbara's list, which is a terrific list. But there's a grassroots organizing group that's been in Durham for years and years called Durham Can. Capital C, capital A, capital N. This is a kind of grassroots organization that was started in Chicago by Saul Alinsky years ago. And it's many of its members are churches, but it's not a religious thing. It's groups belong, and it's about deciding, making judgments about what kind of changes can actually be made in the social world. And it's organizing people to do protests and to do demands and stuff. And it's a really exciting, interesting organization if you're interested in it. Again, it's Durham Can.
Thank you. Kimmy, I want to remind everyone that next Thursday, we're going to have just an open, informal conversation for anyone who'd like to join us. We got quite a few questions from folks prior to our conversation today, and we haven't been able to address them all. I mean, one of the questions I was hoping we'd be able to talk about perhaps next Thursday was, how do we tell the difference between community development and gentrification? Now, that's something we don't have time to talk about in our remaining 2 minutes, but we got some very thoughtful questions about partnerships and what is a partnership really? What's a fair partnership? What's an ethical partnership? So we encourage you, if you're interested in having more of an informal conversation, to join us next Thursday. Unfortunately, there'll be no refreshments.
You know, time.
You can bring your own. 10 o'clock, I think. Didn't we say, Kimmy? 10 o'clock. I want to also just thank Kimmy again, and Ruth. Where's Ruth? Ruth. Well, wherever Ruth is. Thank Kimmy and Ruth and the whole service learning team. This is the hardest working group in show business right here. And it's just such a pleasure to work with everyone. I want to thank all our presenters today. Sam and Mamie and Barbara have been with us since the very beginning. And we love you. And
Amen.
even though we have like 10 meetings to prepare for this, we love every minute of it. And I want to thank the folks from North Carolina Central, Kayleen, and Dr. Johnson, Jeffrey, and Kyrie. That was outstanding. I love that program. I want to learn more about that graduate program in public history. Professor Fernandez, Besaida, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. I love the video. And appreciate all the Duke folks that are here and helping us move the needle at Duke. There's just so much more work to be done. I mean, we think like, oh, we've made a couple of steps, but there's so much more that we can do. And Kimmy, who else do we need to thank, and what else do we need to do? Hey, wait a second. I see Nicole's here. Nicole, you still here?
Yes. Hey, David.
Hey, Nicole. Nicole is one of the leaders of our first year student program, our orientation programs, along with Jordan Hale. And Nicole and Jordan are doing so much to transform the way our students are introduced to Durham and local communities and our history. And I really want to lift that up because there's a lot of work we need to continue to do in that area. So thank you, Nicole, for doing that. Kimmy, what else we got?
Just again, echoing the thanks. It is something, we hope that next fall, maybe even next spring, but likely it'll be next fall, that we can return to an in-person tour of Durham. But I just really want to thank our presenters for immersing us in our community for the last 2 hours in a very interactive and engaging and meaningful way. The conversation will continue next Thursday, and I will send out the Zoom meeting link to all of you later this afternoon. So that is how you will participate, and you can just join. You don't have to RSVP. You've already attended, so you can just join next Thursday from 10 to 11:30. And we've got some reflection questions ready that we can kind of dive deeper into the themes we've discussed today. So
thank you.
I think that is likely everything, but just thank you all for your engagement and attention this morning, all of your lovely comments in the chat. And this was recorded, so I'm happy to also share the recording afterwards.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yay.
Yay.
Yes.